"Ma'am, step away from the car. Now." Camille didn't move at first, because she thought he was talking to someone else. Her hand was still resting flat against the hood of the Aventador, the metal warm from the showroom lights, and for a second, she genuinely believed the sharp voice belonged to some other conversation happening behind her. "I said step away from the car." Grady Pruitt closed the distance in 4 strides. Close enough that she could smell his cologne, something drugstore and aggressive. "You don't touch merchandise like that unless a salesperson invites you to." "I'm sorry. I didn't realize you didn't realize." He said it flat, like he'd heard the sentence 1,000 times and stopped believing it a long time ago. "Where's your ID? Who let you in here?" "The door was open," Camille said. "I walked in." He looked her up and down. The faded windbreaker with a garage logo peeling off the left breast, the jeans with a paint stain on the knee, sneakers that had seen better winters. And something in his face settled into a decision he'd apparently already made before she'd said a word. "Security. We've got a situation up front." 40 feet away, a couple in matching golf sweaters stopped pretending to look at a Range Rover and watched instead. A salesman near the espresso bar lowered his tablet. Nobody moved to help. What Grady Pruitt didn't know, standing there with his radio already pressed to his mouth, was that in 6 days, he'd be sitting across a conference table from the same woman, watching a lawyer slide a termination letter toward him, with his own signature already dry at the bottom. 3 hours earlier, Camille Renwick had been standing in her kitchen in a t-shirt and sweatpants, watching the coffee maker cough its way through the last of a pot, when Julian came down the stairs, already dressed for his run. "You're not seriously going in like that," he said, meaning the windbreaker draped over the bar stool, the one with Dale Foster and Sans Onotive, stitched in cracked yellow thread over the pocket. "I am seriously going in like that. Camille. It's not a photo op, Julian. I'm not doing a ribbon cutting. I want to see what the floor actually feels like before Thursday, before everybody in that building knows my name and starts performing for me." She poured coffee into 2 mugs, handed him one, though he was 3 seconds from heading out the door. "My father wore this jacket for 31 years. I think I'm allowed to wear it into a showroom my own fund just bought." He drank the coffee anyway, standing in the doorway in his running shoes. "You know how this looks if it goes sideways. A sweet due diligence walkthrough where nobody clears you through the lobby." "It's not due diligence." "The deal closed. I signed the last page 9 days ago. This is personal." She set her mug down harder than she meant to. "I want to know if Brannigan Motorcars treats a woman who walks in off the street the same way it treats a woman who walks in with 4 analysts and a driver. If it doesn't, I want to know before my name is on the letterhead, not after." Julian didn't argue further. He knew the shape of this particular stubbornness. He'd watched it get her through business school on a scholarship that covered exactly 2/3 of what she needed. Through 11 years of being the only black woman in rooms where the furniture cost more than her father's yearly salary. Through a fund that now managed close to $2 billion and had just quietly acquired a 14-dealership luxury auto group headquartered 40 minutes from the house they were standing in. "Text me when you're done," he said. "I've got the Hendricks call at 11, but I'll come by after. I'll be fine." She almost was. Brannigan Motorcars sat on a stretch of access road outside Dallas that had been built for exactly this kind of showroom. Glass on 3 sides, polished concrete floors, a coffee bar that served oat milk without being asked. Camille had reviewed the P&L for this location herself. $41 million in annual revenue. Highest customer satisfaction scores in the regional group. According to the internal survey, the outgoing ownership had proudly handed over during diligence. She wondered, walking through the automatic doors in her father's jacket, how many of the people who'd filled out that survey looked like her. The first 10 minutes were fine. A young saleswoman near the entrance, badge-reading Yolanda Briggs, offered her water and asked if she needed help finding anything, and Camille said she was just looking, and Yolanda smiled and let her be, which Camille noted and appreciated. That was exactly the right instinct, the kind of instinct you wanted on a showroom floor. She drifted toward the far wall where the Italian cars sat under warmer light. and that's where Grady Pruitt found her. He'd been watching her for 6 minutes before he approached. She would learn that detail later, from the security footage in a room with far more lawyers in it than she currently had reason to expect. Step away from the car. Now. She'd told him she was sorry. Told him she didn't realize touching the hood was a problem, and he'd told her that people like her didn't get to not realize. And by then Yolanda had come around the counter, with her face gone tight and worried, saying, "Grady, she's fine. I already talked to her." And Grady had told Yolanda to get back to her desk in a tone that made 2 other customers turn their heads. "I need your name," Grady said to Camille. "And I need you to explain what you were doing with your hand. Under the wheel well." "I wasn't under the wheel well. I put my hand on the hood. That's not what I saw." "Then what you saw was wrong." It was the wrong thing to say to a man who had already made up his mind, though Camille didn't raise her voice saying it. She'd learned a long time ago that raising her voice in rooms like this only ever confirmed whatever story the room had already decided to tell about her. So she kept her hands loose at her sides and her voice level, and that composure seemed to make Grady angrier, the way calm sometimes does to people who are expecting a fight they can win. "Security's coming," he said. "Don't move. I'm not going anywhere." That's what they all say until they've got the keys in their pocket. Across the floor, a man in a golf sweater had his phone up, filming, not saying anything, just recording with the particular stillness of someone who wants credit for having documented something without the risk of having intervened in it. Camille clocked him too. 15, maybe 18 people on that floor by then. Salespeople and customers both, and not one of them said a word. The security guard who arrived was younger than Grady, uncertain, clearly unused to being summoned for anything more dramatic than a fender bender in the parking lot. He looked at Camille, jacket, jeans, sneakers, compom, face, and then at Grady, and something crossed his expression that might have been doubt, quickly swallowed. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification." "I don't have to show you identification to stand in a public showroom," Camille said, which was true, and which she said not because she was trying to win an argument, but because she genuinely wanted to see how far this would go before someone with actual authority stepped in and stopped it. "Then we've got a problem," Grady said. "Because I watched you handle a car that costs more than most people's houses, and now you won't tell me who you are. I told you my name isn't the issue. The issue is, you decided something about me before I said a single word to you, and you haven't let go of it since." Grady's jaw worked. "I know exactly what I saw. You saw a woman in an old jacket standing near a car you've decided she can't afford. I saw someone acting suspicious in a $190,000 vehicle. It's not suspicious to look at a car in a showroom whose entire business model is people looking at cars." Yolanda had drifted back despite Grady's order, standing near enough to hear, arms crossed over her chest like she was holding something in. "Grady, please, just let me talk to her. You're making this worse. I told you to get back to your desk." It went on like that for 11 minutes. Camille would know the exact number later, from the timestamp on the footage. Grady's voice climbing, the word suspicious repeated so many times it stopped sounding like English. The security guard shifting his weight from foot to foot, unwilling to physically remove a woman who hadn't raised her voice or made a single threatening gesture, but also unwilling to contradict a manager he answered to. Camille didn't cry. She didn't shout. She stood very still in her father's jacket and watched 18 strangers watch her get accused of theft in a building she had bought outright 9 days earlier. And she thought about her father standing in his own garage decades ago, wiping his hands on a rag, telling a customer who'd questioned his invoice, "I don't argue about what's fair, I just make sure it is." Her phone buzzed in her jacket pocket. She didn't reach for it. She wasn't going to give Grady the satisfaction of seeing her hands move toward anything. "That's it," Grady said. "We're calling the police. Grand theft attempted, at minimum trespassing." "Go ahead," Camille said. "Call them." It was at that exact moment that the glass doors at the front of the showroom opened, and Anthony Reyes walked in, wearing a suit that had clearly been chosen for a very different kind of meeting, carrying a leather folio under one arm, looking around the floor with the particular urgency of a man who is 11 minutes late for something he cannot afford to be late for. Camille, there you are. I've been calling. We need to get to the signing. Whitfield Trust is already at the... He stopped, took in the scene. Grady's raised voice, the security guard, the small crowd. Camille standing perfectly still in a jacket he recognized because he'd seen a photograph of her father wearing it, framed on the wall of her office. What is happening here? Sir, this doesn't concern you, Grady said, already recalibrating his tone slightly for a man in a suit, which Camille noted too, filed away. Would think about for a long time afterward. This woman is detained, pending police arrival. Detained. Anthony's voice went very quiet. Do you know who you're talking to? I don't need to know who she is. I know what I saw. Her name, Anthony said, is Camille Renwick. She is the managing partner of Ashfield Capital. 9 days ago, Ashfield Capital completed the acquisition of Meridian Auto Holdings, which owns, among 14 other properties, this dealership. He let that sit for exactly as long as it needed to. I'm here because she is due at a signing in 40 minutes for the formal transfer paperwork on this specific location. And because I was 15 minutes away when her assistant called to say she wasn't answering her phone, I would like to know why. The showroom had gone very quiet. The man in the golf sweater lowered his phone, though he did not stop recording. Grady's face did something complicated. The specific collapse of a man watching a version of events he'd been narrating out loud for 11 minutes reassemble itself into something else entirely. Something that had his own name written all over the wrong side of it. I wasn't. She wouldn't identify herself. I didn't have to, Camille said, and for the first time her voice carried an edge, though still not a raised one. You didn't ask my name until after you'd already decided not my name. There's a difference. And you know it because you've probably made that exact distinction before with someone else in this exact spot. Nobody in the showroom said anything to that. Yolanda had gone very still, one hand pressed flat against her own collarbone. Mr. Pruitt, Anthony said, consulting nothing because he didn't need to. He'd read the personnel file on the drive over. Once he understood what he might be walking into. You've been floor manager here for 6 years. In that time, this location has had 11 formal customer complaints alleging discriminatory treatment. 4 were settled quietly by the previous ownership group. I'd like you to think very carefully about what you say in the next 60 seconds, because everything from this point forward is going to be reviewed by people who were not in the room today. Camille held up a hand, not sharply, just enough to slow the room down. Anthony. Not here, Camille, not here, she said again, and something in her voice made even Anthony stop. She looked at Grady, who had gone pale under the showroom lights, and at the security guard, who wouldn't meet her eyes, and at Yolanda, whose eyes were wet and furious in equal measure, and at the small, silent crowd that had watched 18 minutes of a woman being accused and interrogated without a single word and threatened with the police, until a man in a suit walked in and announced her net worth. I'll be in the finance office. Yolanda, would you walk with me? Yolanda looked at Grady, then at Camille, and crossed the floor without a backward glance. The rest of it happened the way these things happen once the paperwork catches up to the moment. Slower than the 11 minutes that caused it, and far less visible to the people who'd been watching. Camille sat in the small glass-walled finance office with Anthony and Yolanda, and, 20 minutes later, Julian, who'd driven over the second Anthony, texted him. Still in his running clothes, sweat dried on his temples, sitting beside his wife with his jaw, set in a way she recognized knives from 15 years of marriage as him deciding, silently, exactly how far he was willing to let this go before he said something himself. I don't want him arrested, Camille said, before anyone asked. I want him gone, and I want to understand how 11 complaints in 6 years turned into 0 consequences. Anthony made a note. The prior ownership group has some exposure there. We inherited the personnel file, not the liability. The settlements were structured to keep this location's numbers clean, for exactly the kind of sale we just closed. Of course they were. Camille looked at Yolanda, who was still sitting very straight in her chair, hands folded tightly in her lap. You tried to stop it. He's my manager. There's only so much. Yolanda started again. I've complained about him before. Twice. Both times I got told he brings in the numbers and I should focus on my own desk. How long have you worked here? 2 years in June. And in 2 years, how many times have you watched something like what happened to me today? Yolanda was quiet for a long moment. I stopped counting after the first year. Not because it stopped happening. Because I started needing to not count it to get through my shift. Camille nodded slowly, and something in her face, Anthony would say later, describing it to a colleague, that it was the specific stillness she got right before she restructured an entire division, settled into place. You're not going back to your desk today, Yolanda. Not as a salesperson. I'm not following. You just told me exactly what's wrong with this building. In about 4 sentences, without being asked to write a report or sit through a training module. I need someone who already knows where the rot is, running culture and customer standards for all 14 locations. It's a director title. It comes with a driver, a real budget, and my direct number, and the first thing you do with it is walk this floor and tell me who else here has been swallowing what you just swallowed for 2 years. Yolanda's composure finally broke, not into tears exactly, more like the sudden loosening of a jaw that had been clenched for a very long time. Okay, she said. Okay. Yes. The security guard was reassigned, not fired. Camille reviewed the footage herself that evening and saw a young man who'd been unwilling to physically remove someone who'd done nothing threatening, even under pressure from a superior, and she decided that hesitation, in that moment, had actually been the correct instinct, dressed up as failure by a chain of command that punished exactly the wrong things. Grady Pruitt was in the building for 11 more minutes after Camille sat down in the finance office. Long enough for Anthony to walk back out to the floor with the personnel file, and 2 questions that had no good answers. Long enough for Grady to understand that the woman he'd threatened to have arrested had just become the person who signed his paycheck. Long enough for the color to leave his face entirely before he was walked quietly to his car. He was not prosecuted. There was no theft, no assault, nothing criminal in what he'd done. And Camille made clear to Anthony that she had no interest in pretending otherwise for the sake of a more satisfying ending. What Grady Pruitt had done wasn't a crime. It was smaller than that, and in some ways worse, because it was legal and ordinary, and had apparently been happening in that building for 6 years. With the tacit blessing of an ownership group that valued clean numbers over clean conduct. His termination letter cited a pattern of documented customer complaints inconsistent with company standards, which was true, and which was also, everyone in that room understood, a euphemism doing a great deal of quiet work. He filed for unemployment. It was denied on the grounds of the documented pattern. He found work eventually at a used car lot 40 miles north. A demotion he never publicly acknowledged as connected to anything that had happened at Brannigan Motor Cars. Though the story had, by then, made its way through enough of the regional sales community that everyone who mattered understood exactly why. 6 months later, on a Tuesday morning that smelled like the beginning of a Texas summer, Camille walked back into the Brannigan Motor Cars showroom wearing her father's jacket. The floor looked different. Not the cars, not the concrete, not the light. Those were the same. But something in the air of the place had shifted in a way that was hard to name and impossible to miss. A young man near the entrance, badge reading Deshaun Foster, looked up from a tablet and smiled, easy and unhurried, and asked if she needed help finding anything. And when she said she was just looking, he let her be exactly the way Yolanda once had. She recognized the last name before she recognized the face. Foster. Her father's shop had been Dale Foster & Sons Automotive, and Deshaun had walked in 8 weeks earlier, applying for an entry-level service tech position, 17 years old, still finishing his GD, mentioning almost as an aside during his interview that his grandfather used to talk about a Foster's garage back before it closed, though he didn't know if it was the same family. Camille had pulled the paperwork herself. It wasn't the same family. Different Fosters, no relation at all, the coincidence pure and total. But she'd hired him anyway, because he was sharp, and because Yolanda's new hiring protocol didn't care whose family history lined up with whose, only whether the person in front of you deserved a real chance to prove what they could do. Deshawn was 2 months into a technician apprenticeship program, the company now funded in full at the community college, 11 minutes from his mother's apartment. Yolanda came out from the director's office on his mother's apartment. She had her own office now, glass-walled, looking down over the floor, and crossed to meet Camille with a folder under one arm. Every new hire in the group goes through the standards training now. Full day, mandatory, before they touch the floor. First line of it is simple. Every person who walks through that door is a customer until they prove otherwise, not before. How's it landing? Slowly. Culture doesn't turn on a dime just because you write a good policy. Yolanda glanced toward the entrance, where the morning light was hitting the glass doors at an angle that made the whole showroom glow faintly gold. But it's landing. We had 4 complaints last quarter, group-wide. We used to average that per location. Camille nodded and walked the floor slowly, the way she had 6 months earlier, hand trailing near, but not touching the hoods of cars she had no intention of buying, watching the way the staff moved around customers now, attentive without hovering, warm without performance. She stopped near the espresso bar, where a woman was pouring oat milk into a cortado for a customer in paint-stained work boots who'd wandered in during his lunch break just to look, and nobody was watching him the way Grady Pruitt had once watched her. Julian met her there 20 minutes later, having parked the car himself instead of using the valet, the way he always insisted on doing at this particular dealership. A small private joke between them that only they understood the weight of. He kissed her temple. "You didn't tell me you were coming by today." "I didn't plan to. I was driving past." She looked around the floor once more, at Deshawn laughing at something a customer said, at Yolanda disappearing back up to the mezzanine with her folder, at the light coming through the glass exactly the way it had 6 months earlier, except now it didn't feel like it was illuminating anything that needed catching. I wanted to see it on an ordinary day. Not an anniversary, not a press thing. Just a Tuesday. And Camille was quiet. For a moment, her hand resting on the hood of a car nobody stopped her from touching. My father used to say the measure of a place isn't how it treats you when it knows exactly who you are. It's how it treats you on a random Tuesday, when it doesn't know anything about you at all. She looked at Julian. This is a good Tuesday. Most people who get treated the way Camille Renwick got treated on that showroom floor don't own the dealership. They don't have a lawyer with the closing documents 40 minutes away. They don't get to walk out with a man's job in their hands, and a director title to hand to the one person who tried to stand up for them. Most people go home and carry it and walk into the next showroom a little more braced than they were the last time, and nobody ever finds out any of their names. That's the part worth sitting with, longer than the part where the folder hits the desk and the bad man loses his job. Because what happened to Camille that Tuesday morning wasn't an aberration Grady Pruitt invented on the spot. It was a pattern, 11 complaints deep, quietly settled, quietly buried, running for years under a business that posted record customer satisfaction scores the whole time. Satisfaction scores that, it turned out, depended entirely on who was being asked, and who was doing the asking, and who got to walk out the door without ever being asked anything at all. If you've ever stood in a place like that, a showroom, a lobby, a restaurant with white tablecloths, a store with a door that costs more than your car, and watched someone get looked at like a problem before they'd said a single word, you already know how this story usually ends, and it isn't with a folder and a title change. It's with somebody going quiet and going home and saying nothing, because saying something has never once been guaranteed to cost the other person more than it costs you. So if you got something out of watching this, if some part of you sat up a little straighter when Anthony Reyes said her name, hold on to that feeling for a second and then ask yourself something harder. Not whether you'd want to be Camille. Whether you'd have been Yolanda, standing there with your arms crossed, saying something even though it wasn't your fight, and your manager had already told you twice to sit down. Drop it in the comments. Have you ever watched it happen in a store, a restaurant, a lobby, right in front of you, and said nothing? Would you say something now? Hit like if the answer is finally yes. And subscribe, because there's more of this family story still to come.